Because of the following special broadcast, 48 Hours will not be presented this evening, but will return 1 week from tonight at its regular time.
This is a CBS News special report. A presidential news conference. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
Good evening. So far in his first term, one of the most accessible of modern American presidents, George Bush, will be in the White House East Room shortly for his first formal evening time news conference. Likely to be a prime subject, the turmoil in China, where Americans jammed Beijing airport today for flights out of the chaos and killing. If there's time after this news conference, we may have a special report about China. Right now, though, it's to the White House East Room, where the reporters are expecting President George Bush.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Welcome to the East Room. Please be seated and we shall proceed. Helen?
Cutting off military sales to China does not seem to have made an impression on the rulers there, and they've become more repressive. What else are you going to do to express this nation's outrage? And do you have any other plans?
Helen, I think that the position we took, aiming not at the Chinese people, but at the military arrangements, was well received around the world and was followed by many countries. Right after we did that, many of the European countries followed suit. The events in China are such that we obviously deplore the violence and the loss of life, urge restoration of order with recognition of the rights of the people, and I'm still hopeful that China will come together, respecting the urge for democracy on the part of the people. And what we will do in the future, I will announce at appropriate times. But right now, we are engaged in diplomatic efforts, and other countries are doing the same thing. And let's hope that it does have a ameliorating effect on this situation.
Does your support of human rights and democracy extend to other places in the world, like South Africa, the West Bank, where they've been fighting a lot longer than in China?
Yes, it does.
Repression?
It certainly does. Concern is universal, and that's what I want the Chinese leaders to understand. You see, we've taken this action. I am one who lived in China. I understand the importance of the relationship with the Chinese people and with the government. It is in the interest of the United States to have good relations, but because of the question that you properly raised, we have to speak out in favor of human rights. And we aren't going to remake the world, but we should stand for something. And there's no question in the minds of these students that the United States is standing in their corners. I'll tell you a little anecdote. When our cars went out to the university to pick up some of the students and bring them out, they were met by universal applause. And then the students in this country have been quite supportive of the steps that I have taken. We had a few into the Oval Office the other day, and I must say my heart goes out to them. They cannot talk to their families, and it's very difficult. But yes, the United States must stand wherever, in whatever country, universally for human rights. And let me say, you mentioned South Africa. Absolutely. Appalling apartheid must end. Yeah, Terry.
Mr. President, can the United States ever have normal relations with China as long as the hardliners believed responsible for the massacre, such as Deng Xiaoping and Premier Li Peng, remain in power? In other words, what will it take to get U.S.-Chinese relations back to normal?
It will take a recognition of the rights of individuals and respect for the rights of those who disagree. And you have cited two leaders, one of whom I might tell you was that you mentioned Deng Xiaoping. I'm not sure the American people know this. He was thrown out by the Cultural Revolution crowd back in the late 60s. Came back in. 1976 was put out again because he was seen as too forward-looking. And all I'm saying from that experience is let's not jump at conclusions as to how individual leaders in China feel when we aren't sure of that. But the broad question that you ask, we can't have totally normal relations unless there's a recognition of the validity of the students' aspirations. And I think that will happen. We had a visit right here upstairs in the White House with Mr. Wan Lee. I don't know whether he's in or out, but he said something to me that I think the American people would be interested in. He said, the Army loves the people. And then you've seen soldiers from the 27th Army coming in from outside of Beijing and clearly shooting people. But I don't think, having said that, I don't think we ought to judge the whole People's Liberation Army of China by that terrible incident. And so what I want to do is preserve this relationship as best I can. And I hope the conditions that lie ahead will permit me to preserve this relationship. I don't want to pass judgment on individual leaders, but I want to make very clear to those leaders and to the rest of the world that the United States denounces the kind of brutality that all of us have seen on our television. Right here, Brent.
Mr. President, I want to ask you about the now infamous memorandum that the Republican National Committee distributed concerning Speaker Foley. First, do you think it's credible that this memorandum, which you call disgusting, was not known about by anybody above the level of the staffer who wrote it? And second, do you think it's enough, sir, for this staffer to resign and for everyone then to simply say that the matter is closed?
Well, in the first place, I have great respect for Tom Foley. And he's the one that says the matter should be closed, and he's right. And let me just repeat, it was disgusting. And I hope it's against everything that I have tried to stand for in political life. But I discussed that matter with Lee Atwater. He looked me right in the eye and said he did not know about it. He moved promptly to remove the person that did know about it. And so I accept that. But I think that Speaker Foley, a most honorable man who obviously was done a terrible ill service to by this, is correct when he says, let's get it behind us. And I'd like to shift the gears and move into ethics legislation all the time, being sure we try to avoid this kind of ugliness on either side.
Just a follow-up question. Speaker Foley has indicated that he'd like to change the atmosphere, which has been somewhat poisonous on Capitol Hill this year. Some Democrats have said that you, as the leader of your party here in town, should do something to try to get the Republicans to join in that effort. What do you say to that call, sir?
I don't think the atmosphere is caused by one party or another. I express but the same kind of outrage about that I've just expressed about Speaker Foley, about John Tower. I think any fair-minded person, no matter how the situation worked out, but you know and I know that he was vilified by rumor and innuendo. Vilified. And I don't like it there, and I didn't like this, what happens to Mr. Foley. And yes, Britt, I hope I can find a way to elevate it and keep it on the issues. And there's, you know, I'm a realist. I've been around this track for a long time, but we've got to do better. The ugliness of this climate is bad, and I don't like it, and I'd like to think that I could help. Maybe this itself will help. We'll work right across here.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to return to China for a moment. You mentioned that your goal is to preserve our relationship with the Chinese government, but what do you say to the American people who might wonder why we are not more forceful in being the world's leading advocate of democracy, and are we not living up to that responsibility in this situation?
Well, some have suggested, for example, to show our forcefulness, that I bring the American ambassador back. I disagree with that 180 degrees. And we've seen in the last few days a very good reason to have him there. In fact, one of your colleagues, Richard Roth of CBS, was released partially because of the work of our embassy, of Jim Lilly, our very able ambassador. Some have suggested, well, you got to go full sanctions on the economic side. I don't want to cut off grain, and we've just sold grain to the People's Republic of China. I think that would be counterproductive and would hurt the people. What I do want to do is take whatever steps are most likely to demonstrate the concern that America feels. And I think I've done that, and I'll be looking for other ways to do it if we possibly can. Yeah.
Mr. President, Chinese dissident Fang Lejour has taken refuge in the U.S. Embassy, apparently fearing for his own safety. The Chinese government has called that a wanton interference in internal affairs and a violation of international law. What is your reaction to that, and will the United States grant Fang political asylum in the United States?
First, let me remind the audience here that we do not discuss asylum. It's almost like a public discussion of intelligence matters. But in terms of your question, we have acted in compliance with the international law as an extraordinary measure for humanitarian reasons. His personal safety was involved here, he felt. And then we try, historically, to work these things out in consultation with the sovereign state. So we are not violating international law, in the opinion of our attorneys, and it's awful hard. It is awful hard for the United States when a man presents himself, a person who is a dissident, and says that his life is threatened, to turn him back. And that isn't one of the premises upon which the United States was founded. So we have a difference with them on that, you're right, but I hope it can be resolved. Yeah.
Mr. President, this week the Supreme Court reversed an 18-year standard for fair employment decisions. Now, under the old standard, employers had to justify as legitimate practices that excluded women and minorities. The court's decision now puts the burden of proof on plaintiffs to show that the practices they're challenging are not legitimate. Civil rights advocates say that the decision makes it much more difficult for women and minorities to challenge practices that exclude them. Do you support efforts to restore the old standard?
I have not yet received the memo from the General Counsel on this decision, and thus I really have to defer. I wish I could tell you, but I am one who when the Supreme Court makes the ruling, figures that the President of the United States must adhere by the law, is determined. But we're getting that analyzed, and then sometimes you can take remedy in suggested legislation. Right there in the middle.
Mr. President, the Iranian government, of course, has changed, and the question to you is there hope that there might be restored some kind of relations with that country? As you know, today, the Iranians sent forth informally an offer for some kind of a deal that if the Americans would help free some Iranians held by the phalangists, that they might help us free some of our prisoners as well, or our hostages. Is there any hope for any change in the near future?
For a change in relationship, I stated the other day what it would take to have improved relationships, and that would be a renunciation of terror. We do not need, we can't have normalized relations with a state that's branded a terrorist state, and secondly, they must facilitate the release of American hostages. And so that is what it would take. And there was a case a while back on where Iran asked for information regarding their hostages, never accused us properly so of holding people hostage or in any way condoning that. We condemn it. And so, and we've supplied them information. But it's going to take a change in behavior. We don't mind name calling. They keep calling us the great Satan. That doesn't bother us. Sticks and stones. Remember the old adage, will hurt your bones. The names don't hurt you, but performance is what we're looking for. And I don't see so far any sign of change. I held out the olive branch at my speech, inauguration speech, and I said, look, we want better relations with Iran. I remember when we had good relations. We like the Iranian people. We have a lot of Iranians living in this country. But we can't, and I said, look, if you want better relations, do what's right. Do what's right by people that are held against their will, and we've seen no movement. I would repeat that offer tonight. Yeah. Second.
The other day you picked up the phone and talked to Richard Nixon about China. I'm wondering, since you know some of the Chinese leaders personally, why you don't pick up the phone and talk to them.
I tried today. Isn't that a coincidence you'd ask that question?
And what did you
Line was
learn?
busy. I couldn't get through. Yeah, right? Oh, yeah, you got to follow up. Go ahead.
Well, I'm wondering if you learned anything from those phone calls about who's really running China.
No, because I couldn't get through. And I talked to our ambassador, knowing that we'd understandably get questions on China tonight. And the situation is still very, very murky. And that's the way it's been. I remember, Joanna, being in China when the way we'd tell who was winning and who was losing, who was up and who was down, we'd send people out around town to count the red flag limousines. And then they'd say, oh, there's 30 of them gathered here. There must be an important meeting. And everybody'd hover around trying to see who emerged or who stood next to somebody on a parade on Festival Day. And it's opened up much more than that. There have been dramatic changes since then. But in terms of our trying to figure out their internal order, it is extraordinarily difficult. And I did try to contact Chinese leader today, and it didn't work, but I'm going to keep on trying. I want them to know that I view this relationship as important, and yet I view the life of every single student as important. David, yeah, John.
Mr. President, during the 1988 campaign, Republicans ran ads featuring Chuck Yeager saying that thousands of defense jobs would be lost with the election of Michael Dukakis. Yet your defense budget would cut several thousand jobs in your home state of Texas, including the elimination of the B-22 Osprey. Is there an inconsistency or a conflict with your
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. You want to follow up?
Yes, sir. Please follow up.
Go ahead.
Is there any hope for revitalizing those programs that are going to be cut?
Well, not programs that the Secretary of Defense, in consultation with the White House, had felt were less than priority. And you know, when you go to assign priorities, it isn't easy. And we had a program on to facilitate a way to close bases. And lo and behold, everybody in whose district there was no base thought it was a wonderful idea. And everybody in whose district there was a base or whose state felt, well, we ought to fine-tune this one. They don't seem to understand. It is hard to do this, Dave. And I know there's some people who are thrown out of work. But our defense budget is, in my view, ample for the national security needs of this country. But the Defense Secretary has had to make certain tough calls on systems. And yes, some people have been thrown out of work. But if this economy keeps moving, I expect they'll find work, because we do have a strong level of defense spending. Charles, and then these three will cross here.
Earlier, sir, you made reference to Deng Xiaoping, suggesting that he may, if I read you right, not necessarily have been responsible for the actions. You said that he was a reformer, twice out, back in. What were you trying to say? Do you have information that...
I'm trying to say that I don't know. And I'm trying to say you don't know. And he doesn't know, and she doesn't know, and nobody knows outside. And that's the way the Chinese system works. So for us to read every day some new name out there, it just isn't right. And I don't want to misrepresent this to the American people. But what I do know is that there's events over there that doesn't matter who's in charge, we condemn. And there's a relationship over there that is fundamentally important to the United States that I want to see preserved. And so I'm trying to find a proper, prudent balance, not listening to the extremes that says take your ambassador out, cut off all food to the Chinese people so you show that you're concerned. And I think we've found a proper avenue there, but I cannot, and you ask a good question, I simply cannot tell you with authority who is calling the shots there today.
Let me follow by asking you this then. When you were in China earlier in the year, you met with Li Peng, and I believe you told him that China was exempted from your policy review because you knew China, you understood China. Have you been let down personally? Have you been misled in any way?
I feel a certain sense of personal disappointment, but they weren't exempt from the norms of behavior that are accepted internationally in terms of armed people don't shoot down unarmed students. Nobody suggested that. There was an interesting point in there, and I don't want to delve into the detail of private conversations, but one of the Chinese leader, very prominent name, told me, we want change, but people have to understand it's very complicated here, how fast we move on these reforms. We've come a long way, and indeed they did move dramatically faster on economic reforms than I think any of us in this room would have thought possible. But what hasn't caught up is the political reforms, and reforms in terms of freedom of expression. The freedom of press caught up a little bit, but it hadn't gone obviously near far enough, and now there's martial law and censorship. But we were cautioned on that visit about how fast China could move. Some of it was economic, and clearly some of the message had to do with how fast they could move politically. Yeah.
Mr. President, turning your attention to a matter that's devastating here at home and all over the world, the question of AIDS. Respected experts are now starting to suggest that instead of the anonymous testing that has existed in the past, there should be mandatory reporting of new cases by name and vigorous follow-ups on sexual partners and needle-sharing partners. Do you favor such an approach, sir?
I spoke at an international aid conference at which I was roundly booed 2 years ago or so, advocating certain kinds of testing. And I don't want to have, you said mandatory for everybody?
Yeah. Or at least an end to the anonymity of it.
No, I don't favor that. I think there is a certain right to privacy that we should respect. And so in terms of anonymity, I would like to suggest that records of that nature should be kept private. There's a lot of suffering for AIDS victims. There's a lot of human tragedy that we haven't really focused on too much. And I think of something less than very discreet handling of that information would not be helpful. But do I encourage people to come forward and talk to their doctors and all about partners that may affect others? Yes, I do think you need that kind of frankness, and I do favor certain kinds of testing. Leslie.
Mr. President, back to China. There are reports tonight that the government there has begun rounding up the student leaders who face, at the very least, persecution, at the most, possibly charges of treason and whatever punishment that will bring. You have talked tonight about your strong desire to keep this relationship going and to keep the dialogue and all our business as usual moving forward. If
excuse the interruption.
Well, except for the military zone.
Yeah.
Except for the military zone. If we find out that the people who perpetrated the killings in Tiananmen Square and who are rounding up these students are running the government, can the United States maintain fairly normal relationships with them, given our aim to foster human rights and promote democracy?
It would make it extraordinarily difficult. But the question is so hypothetical that I'm going to avoid answering it directly. But anything that codifies the acceptance of brutality or lack of respect for human rights will make things much more difficult. There's no question about that.
One follow-up. There are 20,000 Chinese students in the United States.
Yes.
Many of them have spoken out. Are you prepared to grant them political asylum in this country?
They're not seeking asylum. I'll tell you why I answer the question that way. They're not seeking asylum. We had 4 of them in the other day. And the first thing that one of them, Jia Hua, said, I love my country. And he wants to go back to his country. But what I have done is extend the visas so that people are not compelled to go back to our country. He's not seeking asylum. This man's not going to turn his back on his own country. He wants to change things. But he also wants to know that he's going to be safe, and I don't blame him for that. So it's not a question of all these people. Asylum is kind of is a legal status, and that's not what they're looking for.
In light of the student roundups, I mean, if they face...
It's appalling. And so I would simply say that what we've already done would say to these people, you don't have to go back, but I'm not going to ask them to turn down the flag that they love and turn their back on China. These are patriotic young people who fear because of seeing their own brothers and sisters gunned down. But they're not seeking asylum. They don't want to flee China. They want to help change China. Yeah, these two in here. Yes, sir.
President, if we could discuss another communist giant for a while. Your attitude towards the Soviet Union seems to have shifted a bit since you became president, from deep skepticism to seeming acceptance of their intentions. Do you now accept Mr. Gorbachev's sincerity in regard to his pledge of new thinking? And can you tell us a little bit about
I
why
don't think
you
it's
changed?
shifted as much as you think, Michael. I don't think it's shifted as much. What I did was to say we need a time to make some prudent discovery, investigation and discovery, and then to go forward with a proposal. And we've done exactly that. The proposal we made at NATO has unified the alliance, and some of the leaders told me that it's more unified than it's been in history. We've made a good proposal now, and I hope the Soviets will take it on good faith, and I am encouraged by the response so far. Having said that, in dealing with the Soviet Union, I am going to continue to keep my eyes wide open. I will also say I want to see perestroika succeed. I want to see it succeed, not fail. And I told Mr. Gorbachev that one-on-one last fall at Governor's Island. So I don't think he believes that I view this as some kind of a Cold War relationship, or that I want to see perestroika fail. He did say that he felt there were some elements in this country that did, but I don't think, I hope that now he knows that I don't look at it that way.
Do you accept that he is sincere in terms of, are you operating on the assumption that he is sincere when he says he's interested in new thinking in international affairs?
He's already demonstrated that he's interested in new thinking. Who would have thought that we would sit here and on television see a relatively lively debate? It's nothing like our Congress, but it had some similar aspects to it. And so I think he has already demonstrated his commitment to change and to reform. But there's ways now to solidify these changes. They have 600,000 troops, and we have 305. And I made an offer to him. I said the best way to guarantee stability and less warlike attitude is to go to equal numbers. And they are being asked to take out many, many more troops than we are. But I've said, what's wrong with being equal? The United States will have 275,000 troops deployed, and you, sir, will have 275,000. So here's a test now. Nobody can argue the inequity of that, particularly since we've put aircraft and helicopters and these other categories on the table. So, and I am inclined to think that if I do my work properly and we keep NATO moving forward on this quick timetable, that we can succeed. And if we do, he will once again have demonstrated his desire for change. Yes, sir.
Mr. President, first, at the great risk of appearing to be trying to make points, please convey birthday wishes to Mrs. Bush.
You've made it. She asked not to be reminded of her birthday, but she's doing very well, and thank you. And if I could editorialize here 1 minute, there have been a lot of expressions unrelated to her birthday about her health. And may I say that we have been very moved by that, and that she is doing just fine. And I think her doctors would say the same thing. She's got this Graves' disease under control. Please excuse the personal interruption there.
Mr. President, some of your critics say that despite your rhetoric, General Noriega can sit in Panama for as long as he wishes, in effect laughing at you, sir, laughing at the United States. Can you do